y'all, welcome back to my channel. This is the New Year's resolution challenge where I'm posting a video every day, just diving deep into different topics around trauma, the brain, and different ways that trauma impacts you later in life and what you can do about it. Again, my name is Jessica Lang and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So for the past couple of days, I've been talking specifically about the brain, how the brain develops, the stress response system, and now I want to focus more on the part that gets developed first in utero, and that would be the brainstem. So as I've been saying, the brainstem is the most primitive part of our brain. Is responsible for regulating core physiological features, so your blood pressure, regulating your temperature, metabolism, breathing, basically anything that keeps your physical body going, keeping you alive. That's what the brainstem is responsible for. So it takes in information through from the outside environment, through your five senses, mixes in there with all the stuff happening on the inside. So let's say it's cold outside and your body feels, oh, I'm cold, then signals get fired up in other parts of the body to release different transmitters and hormones to begin warming up your body so that you are at your optimal baseline level. So that's basically what the brainstem is responsible for. So this is something that your body is doing every day, every minute of the day. It's just trying to keep a state of equilibrium. So let's look at what happens in your body when you experience a trauma. So when you experience a trauma, your brain senses this thing over here is a threat. The brain starts signaling to different parts of the brain, focusing on the brainstem here, right? That this thing over here is a threat. We got to release all these hormones to take action to protect you for survival. So that's the stress. So the stress response system kicks in. It does its job. The trauma's over. Your body, the hormones start being released. You start to move back to a state of your equilibrium, and in theory that's the end. That's what happens. But if you've experienced repeated traumas or adverse experiences throughout your childhood, and especially during those first 5 years when the brain's developing so fast and so many connections are being formed, is that your baseline kind of shifts and it becomes more sensitive to things in the environment that signal off a threat. And what this means for the brainstem area, right, the part that regulates those core features, is that for many folks, their heart rates might be a little bit faster, what's typical for others, or they may run hotter or colder. So like these kind of core physiological features actually get shifted, and you have kind of like a new normal. But one of the major things that happens when you've experienced repeated trauma is that your brain, like I said yesterday, it develops in a sequential fashion, and it's dependent, and what gets kind of embedded and ingrained is what's being are those things that happen repeatedly and continuously. So if your stress response system is constantly being activated, then parts of your brain that are responsible for that activation get more developed, and the parts that aren't used as much don't get as developed. So what ends up happening is, for trauma survivors, they have overactivation in certain parts of their brain and underactivation in other parts, or underdeveloped functions in other parts of the brain. And this leads to some of the more difficulties that folks have as they get older, and those parts are missing. So it's not that you're brain damaged or anything like that. There's things that you can do to actually start to fill in those different gaps. One of the things I do in my practice is I'm certified NMT survivor, so that's the Neurosequential Model Therapeutics by Dr. Bruce Perry and his team over at the Child Trauma Academy. And what we do is what's called a brain mapping, and I'll show you an example. Okay, so here's an example, or here is basically what I do with the NMT. So it talks about adverse experiences, and I go through and I get a developmental history, right? So I'm asking questions about the mom. So questions such as, But maternal factors refer to the mother's capacity for creating a healthy intrauterine experience for the fetus, related to mother's age, health, prenatal care, and other potential risk or attenuating factors related to fetal growth and risk aside from those in other items, right? So these are kind of the examples of what I would score. So I might put a number, I'll put a number here, and I'll do this for every single question, right? So we go through, and you see it's divided in birth to 2 months, infancy, early childhood 4 to 13, and then we have the biggest gap, which is the childhood 4 to 10. And there's also should be also a piece for adolescence and beyond. And I do this with my child clients, I do this with my teen clients, and I do this with my adult clients. So after I plug in all the information, a report is produced. This is a practice one, so it's not so bad. This is not an actual client. So this is the brainstem stuff, right? Starts developing here. Perinatal first birth into the first 2 months of infant's life. And this whole kind of period, boop, 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 is that kind of core regulation. Limbic system functioning begins developing in this area, and moving along to early childhood, right? So we're moving up into like the first 5 years. So the whole thing is that lower part of your brain stuff gets developed in this region. Cortical function starts developing more, and this part we're talking about here, toddlerhood. But it definitely is not developed until way past here. Okay, so this shows kind of the risk that a person might have for having some problems. Let me see. Yeah. So this is kind of developmental risk. So you can see for this person, right? Like high risk is this red area. Moderate is here. This person doesn't have too much risk. It's low, and then it breaks it down by adverse experiences. So you're talking about living in environments with a lot of community violence or war-torn countries, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, children, babies, infants, etc., who are moving repeatedly between caregivers. So a lot of the fostering, like thinking about the foster system, right? They're going to have difficulty with attachment because they're constantly being bounced around between caregivers. And so that's adverse experiences. And that piece I just talked about is also relational health. So then you look at these factors, a combination of these factors, and they put you kind of at like a risk for parts of your development not doing so well or being underdeveloped. And what you want is for adverse experience to be low. So you want this to be low, and you want this to be high. If this is high and this is high, you've got kind of a problem. If this is low, but this is also low, you have a problem. But if this is high, but this is also high, then this can kind of give you a little bit of a buffer, so that certain things it's not so impactful. So this person has like a really nice brain map. I should have chosen somebody that had a lot of red now that I think about it, which I do. So basically all this is saying, the green part, is that this is in the typical developing range. So this is what you want. You see here, you want this to all be green. So this is just some parts that aren't developed as well. I've worked with clients where a lot of this, and it shows you, it's like this is your cortical functioning up here. This would be your limbic stuff, I believe. Yeah. And then this is kind of your brainstem stuff. So I've worked with folks where like all this in here is kind of red. And this up here thus becomes a lot of red. So if you look here, you see developed, typical range, episodic, emerging. So it's something you're working on. But this is what you really don't want to see. And this is like extreme abuse situations, or neglect. So most people with moderate trauma histories, I find them to be kind of in like, not this one, sorry. I didn't mean to circle that. This region, but like for severe clients, I get a lot of this down here. And at the end, right, oh, and this, will give you kind of some information also about what parts should be targeted first. So when you're looking at treatment options, right, dependent on what's in a red area, you usually want to target this first, right? The sensory integration. So it's how the information is coming in through the five senses and being processed in your body. So you want to kind of capitalize or utilize, I don't know what verb you want to use, some of that brainstem functioning, which is what I was supposed to be talking about today, and got a little bit sidetracked. And then self-regulation, that's that limbic system. Relational goes across, and cognitive is what mediates it all. Okay, I'm gonna close out of this, but that was helpful. So I do that NMT at every intake, and then I do one every 3 months until they complete treatment, because I can get a glimpse of how they're progressing with the recommendations and the treatment options we are doing. So it's very individualized, and that's all I need to say is blah, blah, blah. So when looking at something like, I'm sure you're wondering, since we're talking about the brainstem, right? And the brainstem is the part that develops first. It's the part that's responsible for those core regulating features. I want you to think, when I talk about brainstem, I'm thinking of like sensory integration. So the way that information comes in and gets processed and then is organized in the body. So when I'm talking about sensory, so when we think about brainstem, I want you to think about sensory integration techniques and how to kind of manage those, and also being connected to your body. So you're talking about information that gets processed through sensory input, and this can be underdeveloped based on frequently having your stress response system activated because of multiple adverse experiences and or traumatic events. So probably my number one tip, or my number one recommendation, and I spoke of it yesterday, but I'm just putting it in a category for you, is trauma sensitive yoga. So yoga helps you get in touch with your body, with your breathing. I can't speak highly enough about the importance of trauma sensitive yoga in the healing process. It works for kids, it works for teens, it works for adults, anybody, honestly, it really does work. My second recommendation would be working with a trauma sensitive massage therapist. So then that's somebody who can, and this one, again, I feel like this is more poignant, especially for like sexual abuse survivors. And this might be something you do maybe later in treatment. But again, helping you kind of get more in tune with the touch response of your body. I'm just gonna leave it there because it's a little bit more complex, and I don't want this video to be too long. Probably one of my favorites, this is the third recommendation, is playing around with different scents, and that's smell. Sorry, I don't know how that came off, but playing around with different smells. So if the first two are kind of more about body based and texture and physical feels, smell is also very powerful, and so integrating things that smell really nice is a nice way to help you calm down, feel more relaxed, combat kind of some of that, smells are something that trigger you, finding something that combats that by finding, but you can use like essential oils, just regular hand lotion. Like I have a couple favorites. I'm a Bath and Body Works addict, so I have all different kinds of fragrances, and I definitely wear them based on my mood and how I'm feeling. So that's actually some sensory integration stuff. Also scented candles. I mean, it runs the gamut, but playing around with different senses also can help you with regulating your body. Let's see, recommendation 4. If you have any sensitivities with like your vestibular system, or so movement, you need a lot of movement. If you need to move a lot or have intense kind of input that way, then rocking or swinging, again, I worked with occupational therapists, and this is why a lot of these sensory integration techniques are perfect if they're done in tandem with an occupational therapist. So when I did my agency work and I would have my kid clients, when they would become kind of dysregulated, they would find what worked for them. Most people kind of gravitate towards things that naturally regulate their system. It's just very soothing for the overall system, and it calms the body down. So for when I did my agency work and I worked in tandem with an occupational therapist with many of my clients, the clients would end up kind of finding things on their own that worked for them. They just didn't really realize why it worked for them. But rocking was big, and it just calms the body, and it's very, very soothing. And so if you can buy a rocking chair or a hammock or go to the park and swing on the swing, you'll find that your system feels a lot calmer with that type of movement. Recommendation number 5. This one can be tricky, but it's still very beneficial, and that is eating a hard candy. Eating can be a little bit of a challenge, especially if you use eating as a maladaptive coping strategy. So you either have some form of disordered eating due to your trauma, so that's overeating or not eating enough. But sucking on a hard candy, again, like, it plays with that oral reflex that we all have, and it can be everything I'm going to say is going to be because it's very soothing and regulating for the body, but it has a way of also and the cool thing about kind of sucking on a hard candy like a peppermint or one of those butterscotch mints is that it's also can be used in conjunction with like a mindfulness activity, because you're slowing down, and so it's giving you something to focus your attention on as well. So that's why I recommend it. So those are my 5 recommendations for sensory integration techniques, which are targeted more towards your brainstem area. Of course, there's many more things that you can do, and you can head over to my website, jessicalangtherapy.com, and I have a resource page where you can download a list of 365 ways that you can cope, and it's basically one for every day of the year, and I've broken them down by the brainstem, by your limbic system, by your cortex. And so as I go on throughout this video series, I'll refer to that again, but it's something that I use with my clients, and they found it very beneficial. I find it very beneficial, so head over and check that out. As always, I want to hear from you. Please comment down below. Tell me, what are some of the things that you use to regulate your body, right? When you're feeling dysregulated, when things are feeling out of control, what are some of the healthy things that you do to calm your system down? Share below. I'll comment on it. Other people, you can give them ideas also, and that's what matters. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.